Did you know that farming has an alarmingly high suicide rate? Join me, Dr. Marianne, a qualified clinical psychologist, as I chat with my guest today about what we can do to be the difference that makes a difference, to turn the tide on this alarming trend, which clearly demonstrates that farming is not just hard on the body, it's hard on the mind too. Thanks for joining me for this really important episode. I'm chatting with Sharon May, who is a researcher into farming and mental health, but also is part of the farming community too. If you find this content useful, please do like, share, comment and engage. Thank you so much. Hi, I just want to welcome along Sharon May to the podcast. Hi, Sharon.
Hi, how you doing?
Really well, thank you. Thanks for asking. How are you feeling now that you've handed in your research for your masters?
A big sense of relief. I don't think it's quite hit me yet. There's always that niggly thought that there's something else I should be doing, but yeah, I'll get used to it.
Yes, absolutely. And the nature of being an academic is that you might well start studying sooner than you imagine. Yeah. So obviously, I hope it's okay to say that you are immersed in farming yourself. You married into a farming community and a farming family, and you have now done research looking at what it's like to be a farmer's wife. Could you tell us a little bit, set the context really for why mental health is even a conversation in farming, if that's okay?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's often touted as a statistic that the suicide rates for those in farming are much higher than the general population, and it's one of the occupations with the highest suicide rates, unfortunately. I think the research into why has accelerated massively in recent years, which it's needed to do. There's so many contributing factors to why agriculture takes such a strain on mental health. But I think the interesting thing is that it doesn't just affect the principal farmer. It has a ripple effect into those around, partners, families, that sort of thing as well, because the nature of it is that it's a family business very often. So it affects more than that one person, but that one person is the linchpin for a lot of the pressure, I think.
Thank you. And yeah, I'm sort of racking my brains a little bit thinking about some of my learning for kind of this during my career, and remembering some kind of theories that maybe it's not necessarily about the number of people attempting to end their own life, but it's about the people that manage to do that. And actually in farming populations, people have got access to perhaps more space, more seclusion and more kind of violent means. Is that still a current theme?
It's an interesting question to ask, because I think a lot of people put it down to, it's got a high rate of suicide because of the access to lethal means, particularly firearms and things like that. Unfortunately, it just means that those who attempt tend to complete. I think suicide statistics in their own are an interesting, measurable way of assessing mental health in an industry, but they don't take into account those who don't attempt suicide, or those who have thought about suicide but haven't attempted it. And they don't take into account all those people who are struggling on a day-to-day basis with mental health issues. So whilst it is an interesting statistic to use to kind of illustrate the prevalence of mental health in farming, I think it's just the tip of a very large iceberg, to be fair.
Yeah, I agree. And I think sort of thinking back on everybody I've ever assessed, really, it's very rare that someone hasn't told me they'd either attempted to end their own life or certainly been very close to it. And of course, I'm a skewed population because I'm a qualified clinical psychologist, having worked in trauma services. But I think this is endemic. And I guess we're talking specifically about men today. Even for a man to be in a service, seeing a therapist and turning up regularly is kind of hard. And I guess that's even harder in farming, where we're putting barriers in place if we're asking people to come into clinic, don't wear your wellies, don't be too smelly, all of that stuff. But also, how do you get cover to do that? How do you begin to tell people, maybe you're just a lone farmer. How do you begin to have the space to do that, Sharon?
I think one of the biggest barriers to sort of help seeking when farmers are struggling with their mental health is that self-stigmatization, generalizing massively, but they're a practical, logical person, and they're used to be able to fix things. if something's broken, they find a way to fix it. Even if it's a botched job, they tie it up with a piece of baler twine until it works. Emotional stuff doesn't work like that. And I think they find that really destabilizing and see that as a bit of a failure. It's not helped by the masculine stereotypes that go along with farming, as with a lot of other masculine-based industries. And then you've got the sort of the work ethic that is born from necessity, but becomes a bit of a badge of honor. I haven't taken a day off the farm in, 6 years, plus the practicalities of, not being able to step away at certain times of year or at certain times of the day, that sort of thing. So there's a lot of things in the way before someone can say, I need help. Primarily admitting it to themselves, then admitting it to other people, then actually seeking the professional services that they might need. Geographic isolation always used to be a big factor because, literally stepping off the farm. COVID, if it's done anything, has proved that actually you can do a lot of that from the comfort of your own home. But still, then there's the element of privacy. Your home is your workplace is your home. And there's a lot of things that just generally get in the way of kind of being able to take that step forward, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to confess, I might be profess, I'm not sure, to being a big fan of Clarkson's Farm. And that feels like it's illuminated some areas I'd never considered. The maths element of how can we get profit out of this when there's actually very, very hard. The margins are so reliant upon the seasons, but also upon kind of government subsidies as well. And the kind of whether things are changing almost by the minute, it seems.
I think farming is a kind of, it's a difficult one because a farm is a home and a farm that you're caught at both ends. You're a producer and a consumer. So when economically things start to squeeze, the cost of living goes up, but you're also getting less margin for your products. The supermarkets, the big sellers are paying less for what they get from their producers and charging more to their customers, and a farming family gets stung twice in that. So economically it's very difficult. Then you've got things like sort of global events, the war in Ukraine affecting fertilizer prices, fuel prices, that sort of thing. So their costs of production are going up too, as well as the amount they're getting for their product. So financially it's a really, really tough place to be. And then there's so much out of your control in terms of the weather. The weather can absolutely scupper you. There's animal disease, avian flu has been in the news a lot recently, TB, that sort of thing. And all these things that are nothing you have any control over can scupper an already very tight place that you find yourself in. And I think the pressures of that were highlighted by Jeremy Clarkson. I think a lot of people came up to us after that first series in particular and said, we just had no idea. And I think that's part of it too. Some farmers are worried about talking to people because they just don't get it. There's that cultural isolation too. There's a feeling that the professionals they might talk to might not get the pressures of their job or understand the situation that they're in. And I think that also creates a bit of a gap.
Absolutely. And if people listening or watching to this thinking about how they could be a better friend or a better family member to someone in farming, or a better clinician if they're working with kind of farmers or wanting to engage farmers, what's the one top thing they can do, Sharon?
God, that's a big question. I think it's difficult because not many people know a farmer. Like, not many people can go and hug a farmer. It doesn't work like that. But those that do, check in. But I think as consumers, we have a responsibility to be more careful about the choices we make in order to support an industry that is on its bottom, so to speak, at the moment. And I think as professionals, flexibility is a big thing, which for those of us who are used to working in sort of regular weekly slots at certain times, that sort of thing, it's being open to working in a slightly different way, in the same that you would, with shift workers, that sort of stuff. To kind of go into it with an open mind about it. There's a certain amount of mistrust between farmers and health professionals sometimes, because historically there hasn't been that understanding of their industry in physical health as well as mental health. So kind of as a practitioner going into that sort of with a bit of an open mind, knowing that trust really has to be established. I mean, it does with all relationships, but particularly with that one, I think it's probably shaky to start with. And if a farmer turns up asking for mental health support, they really need mental health support. There's anecdotal evidence that, if a farmer turns up in A&E, he's probably really injured, take him seriously, or he's really sick. And I think it's the same with mental health too.
Absolutely. And thinking about whether we can kind of prioritize as key worker, accordingly in our services. And, I think another thing that Clarkson's Farm has done quite well is highlight there's real joy possible in farming as well. And actually, those still moments, the moments where you're just at one with nature, it really does show us the appeals of farming, doesn't it?
I think that's really true. I mean, most people are in farming because they have an affinity for it, because they love the lifestyle, they love the job, they love the animals. And if you were talking to a member of a public who was suffering with depression, you'd tell them to get out in nature, get some fresh air, do something physical, all these things that like farming, tick, tick, tick. But it's almost like the pressure of the other stuff is preventing that from happening. It should be a wholesome, engaging lifestyle, but the external pressures such that at the moment it's very hard to enjoy it. You do get those bits in between, for sure. And that's why those who still farm.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for your time today, Sharon. I think this has illuminated some really important considerations for people who might be working with farmers or would like to work with farmers. Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you so much for watching. The farming community really is the backbone of the UK and really internationally too. Without farmers and their work, well, then life would be unsustainable. Let's do what we can to make their lives feel more fulfilling, more sustainable, and to improve their well-being. I hope you found this helpful. If you have, please do drop me a comment, and consider subscribing to the channel too. Thank you for your time, and I'll look forward to catching up with you very soon.